Welcome to the Vernuccio Novak Report and the American Political Zone. From New York, this is Frank Vernuccio.
And from Washington, this is Daria Novak.
Well, Daria, the news today, as we start taping today's show, of course, is that Dan Sullivan from Alaska has won his race, which gives the GOP 50 seats in the United States Senate. Two more to go, of course, with the Georgia races still up, coming up in the near future. The controversy over the recount or over the various Trump lawsuits, I think much of the major media is missing the point. They're saying in some cases that, well, they don't think the odds are very good that Donald Trump can get enough votes out of a recount or out of challenges to actually exceed the vote count of Joe Biden. That may or may not be true, but it is important that it go ahead for another reason. And I'm going to be very blunt on this. Look, we have accepted Democrat cheating in election as a normal course of events for far too long. We joked about Republican voting machines from Republican districts in Illinois accidentally falling into the Chicago River. We've talked about how the Democrats consistently oppose voter ID, but to get into their convention, you have to show picture ID. We saw this disaster come about with these mail ballots this year when everyone knows they were not secured, they were ripe and open to fraud. We've seen in many parts of the country that allow ballot harvesting for political hacks to collect ballots which have no secure chain of custody to be written up or changed whatever way possible. We saw in the state of Michigan votes mysteriously show up in the middle of the night, no one watching, and every one of the 10,000 or 100,000 ballots are all for Joe Biden, an absolute physical impossibility. Democrat cheating has been a cancer on our electoral system. Never before have they been seriously challenged. This is the first time. A precedent has to be established that America will not tolerate the wide-scale cheating that has characterized Democrat presidential campaigns for far too long.
It cannot be allowed to happen, because if we lose one man, one vote, if we lose the integrity of the electoral system, everything else is going to fail. So to me, both Democrats and Republicans, liberal and conservative, should be calling for voter integrity, which means let's protect the minority vote in this country. Let's protect the majority vote. Everybody deserves to have their vote counted, except for those who are dead. And we've already seen a number of dead voters voting. We have actually at least one candidate who died during the summer who was elected to office. You know, we've got some crazy things going on this year. Now, I recognize that the way the courts come out may not be the way that I would like to see them come out, but we need to go through this process. We have had for over a decade now, probably close to 2 decades, secretaries of state around the country who are responsible for voter integrity, discouraging people from going out and cleaning up the rolls of voters in this country. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that it's been portrayed by some people as we're trying to take away the vote from some individuals. It's actually just the opposite. We are trying to guarantee that everyone's vote counts as a whole vote. If we have one person vote that's legally voting and another person voting illegally, somebody just lost half the value of their vote. We cannot allow this to happen in our country. I think this is one of the big differentiators from this country and dictatorships. The Chinese do not understand why we care so much about the vote. Over and over again, you know, Frank, when I talk to officials from China, they keep saying, what does it matter? You can just make up your own mind. You can just decide. We are a country of rule by law, not rule by man. I think this election is critical, no matter who is declared the winner, that we follow through on the process. It's a norms-based system. It's worked for hundreds of years. And I don't think we can afford to lose it now.
Well said, Jared. You know, part of the problem with going forward with the lawsuit, of course, is that with the various actions, is that the court operates differently than just plain common sense. If 100,000 ballots in Michigan or any place else show up in the middle of the night, all with one candidate's name on them, it's pretty obvious that's cheating. And I think there's been wide-scale cheating in many states in this election on the part of the Democrats. A court, unfortunately, can't take cognizance of that. They have to go through the ballots one by one, even though common sense tells you this is ridiculous. So it's vital that a precedent be set, that those votes be challenged, and that safeguards be set up for the next election. The next one, of course, is 2022. That would be the midterm elections. So that this type of wide-scale cheating by the Democratic Party cannot be allowed to go unchallenged ever again.
You know, I've said this in the past, when we vote, it's a privilege, a duty, a responsibility. It's something that many people around the world don't have. It's not only the act of casting the ballot, but we as a country have to have a duty, responsibility, and a privilege to make sure of the integrity of the electoral system, of that vote after that ballot is cast too. Now, you know, you and I have talked about electronic voting. You know, we've seen cyber crimes all over the place. We know that even the Democrats have come out and talked about foreign countries that have infiltrated our political system and influenced it through social media. We need to make sure that no outsider or insider has influenced the casting of ballots in this country. You know, Frank, what I don't understand is why can't we come up with a good compromise? And tell me what you think about this one. People have to get to the polls. I understand if they're ill, too old, infirm, that's one thing. If they're out of the country or away from their voting district on a business trip, I understand the purpose of an absentee ballot. But if we allow people in a presidential election to vote Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, we cover a whole weekend, we cover a few days of the work week, there's plenty of time to spread out the balloting, plenty of time for people to get to the polls. I would agree to something like that and think that that could still work. But I don't think that having balloting by mail over extended period of time, and then after that extended period of time, having it go beyond the date of the election, it just leads to dangerous consequences. And I think that these consequences may be unintended by people who are trying to figure out a good way of having everyone be able to vote. There's other ways. Just changing something for the sake of change isn't right. If we can improve the process, so be it.
Absolutely. And you know, even beyond that, with these ridiculous rules that were set up for mail-in ballots being so open and so subject to fraud, even with that, the Democrats were not satisfied. They said that ballots that were sent in after the deadline date, postmarked after the deadline, that they should be counted too. You know, we are seeing an absolute contempt for any kind of rule. The only rule that I see coming from the Democratic Party is that they must win under all circumstances. Now, we're seeing reports as well coming from the postal authorities that some of these bags of ballots, apparently from Republican areas, have been waylaid. Others from Democrat areas are being given to for being counted. There is no recognition of any rules, again, except a Democrat must always win.
And it's a sad state of affairs because we are a great nation. We are the leader of the free world. We will continue to be the leader. We are not bereft of a philosophy that includes freedom, that includes rule of law. I think this is where we can surpass China even 50 or 100 years from now, or any other country around the world. But we need to maintain that system. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing today. And we cannot allow the mainstream media to change the narrative to make it look like one side is a poor loser and therefore they're trying to figure out ways around the system. If there is voter integrity and we count the ballots again, then we should get the same answer. So the Democrats shouldn't mind doing it.
But they certainly seem to, don't they? You know, there's another thing we have to talk about as well, and that is the concerted effort by major social media sites like Facebook and Twitter at crucial points in this election to censor out non-Democrat candidate statements or entries on their particular sites. This is censorship writ large. It is dangerous. It is wrong. It's time for Americans to revolt over this.
Yeah, we have so many issues, Frank. I know we could talk for hours, but all I can say is everybody has got to hang in there for a few more days. Let's get through this process.
And let's go to our first guest. Dr. Sal Giorgiani is an expert in men's health and is a registered pharmacist. He is a recognized expert in drug regulatory and U.S. pharmaceutical policy. He has authored, co-authored, or presented some 200 works in health, care, industry regulation, and business. Dr. Sal, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me on today.
Are you a bit surprised that exactly 1 week after the election, Pfizer announces that it has a vaccine? It seems that many experts in the field don't believe that this was an accident waiting 1 week after the election.
Well, quite honestly, I'm surprised at the results, but I'm not surprised that they waited until after some of the dust cleared for the election. You know, pharmaceutical companies like to do their science work in the world of science, and they bring them out to the real world, you know, and I think that was, I do suspect that there was deliberate and planned.
You know, that's a frightening thought. Now, I understand that New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo has made an outrageous statement, basically saying that, it would be bad if this was done before Joe Biden took the oath of office, if indeed Joe Biden does take the oath of office. As a pharmacist, as a medical professional, what do you think when you hear a governor put the health of his population behind his political orientation?
Yeah, I heard that and I was aghast. I used to live in New York. I went to school in New York, Columbia University, my alma mater, and I worked a lot of healthcare, great hospitals and clinics and pharmacies in New York City. But I was aghast when I heard that. And I think, you know, perhaps that was one of those, I wish I hadn't said that the way I said it moments that came across as just as what he intended, and that darn, I wish this had come out a month later. So I think that's unfortunate. What worries me even more is this statements that I've heard from Governor Cuomo and others, which say that, well, look, we should develop our own plan under the new administration. I don't trust FDA to review the product. I'm going to get my own scientists to review the products, the vaccines that come out and make a determination for people in New York. I think that's dangerous. And I think that not too subtly subverts the entire underpinnings of a federal government with federal authority to do certain things. So I think if we all had the luxury of waiting another month, another 2 months, well, that's fine. If this were hangnails or a cure for balding, well, sure, I can see taking a little bit of time for that, although some guys might not. But for something as important, as devastating, particularly to New York, as this coronavirus is, I would think that there would be tremendous joy about there being a little bit of a pinprick of light at the end of this big, long tunnel we've been suffering through.
You know, Dr. Sal, we're hearing so many different things. There's vaccines coming out of Russia, out of China, out of the United States. How does an average American decide what's safe? What's the process? Do we wait? Do we get vaccinated? I mean, what's going on? Because this process for this particular virus seems a bit different from years past.
Yeah, it is very different. It is quite stunning. I'm not a virologist, but I know data when I see data, and I have a historical perspective on other pandemics and such. But this is a little bit different in many, many regards, particularly in the way it affects so many different body systems. And that's part of the danger. If you do get it, we're now seeing long-lasting effects way past what you would see if you had the not regular flu or some other respiratory virus. But be that as it may, your point about how do you know it's safe, where do you go for information? People they must become informed about the vaccines that we have here in the United States. First off, I'd give some assurance that the companies that are creating these vaccines, the Pfizer's, the AstraZeneca's, Glaxo's, they're all very, very well versed in this. They've been developing vaccines for generations. In fact, Pfizer, if I'm not mistaken, had one of the first oral polio vaccines way back in the 50s, where I had long curly hair and it was brown. But so that's one thing, that you have companies in the United States that are tried and true companies that do this work. Same in Europe. AstraZeneca is a long-standing, very well-regarded corporation. The data that the folks should be looking at should come from credible sources. WebMD, Cleveland Clinic. There are lots of good websites on the NIH sites. The CDC website is a good site. Those are good, credible sources. If you're going, talk to your doctor, your physician, your nurse practitioner, your local pharmacist. They have the information, and very importantly, they know a little bit about you, so that they can give you the kind of advice that's going to fit best your circumstances. You have to make a decision. Some people feel that it may be mandated, vaccinations may be mandated by either the federal government. I'm not sure that everybody's in agreement that they have that authority, but it may also be mandated by local municipalities. Don't forget, states govern what students must get before they can go to school, before they can go to college. Employers can mandate what you have to have before you come into work to keep themselves and you safe. So there's going to be a lot of mandates out there. So people need to become knowledgeable, and now's the time to do that. So thank goodness you're doing some work on this to let your listeners know, your viewers know, and they have to make a conscious decision of how they're going to approach it.
So Dr. Sal, if the government or local or federal start trying to mandate this vaccine, it seems to me that they don't have long-term results because this virus wasn't around. So how would an American citizen know that the long-term implications from it are safe? We saw, I believe it was Gardasil when it was given to young girls. There wasn't much, I think that was the vaccine. There wasn't much information on it. Are we going to go through the same thing again and after the fact potentially find out what harm could have been done?
Well, that is the number one concern folks have. I don't think people are concerned too much about it being effective, especially now with this very stunning news of Pfizer's 90% effectiveness rate in preventing coronavirus infections is safety. So let me point out this. There's a lot of concern that we're rushing to develop this vaccine. So first off, that laboratories have been looking at SARS type viruses since about 2002 and 2012, when we were, worried about another pandemic or low national epidemic. So they've really been watching and looking at how to create vaccines for this virus for a fairly long time. The other point is that there is nowhere it's written it must take 5 years to develop a vaccine. That's because that's the administrative, the bureaucratic, the slowness of the system. The best way I can explain it really is it's when you take your car to the mechanic and the mechanic tells you it's going to be ready in 3 days, and really it's 10 minutes worth of work. It just takes some time to get to it, all the paperwork, all the estimates and such. So a lot of the administrative material has been compressed. These companies are working, I've been told, 7 days a week. CDC, the good scientists there have been working 7 days a week to get this through. And then the other thing to give it appreciation for is, generally speaking, when a new drug comes onto the market, it's tested in about 3,000 to 5,000 persons, 3,000 to 5,000 persons. And for many things that are chronic medicines, they're given over years. For some things that are acute, it's once or twice or a few days. This is a once, maybe twice administration for these drugs. And then also each one of these companies is studying between 40 and 60,000 persons. So we're going to have this massive database. So there's not that much difference between all of these vaccines to not be able to look at this data across all the different vaccines and come to some reasonable conclusion that there's a class effect or class safety issue. We haven't seen much of that at all, just some local in pain on injection, maybe a headache or two, but nothing that even the volunteers have said has been massively hurtful. So we're going to have 10 times the data on each and every one of the 4 major vaccines that we have on any other drug that's out on the market when it comes out. And they're going to require post-marketing surveillance on these up to 24 months. My latest information is that Pfizer is going to follow their clinical subjects for 24 months out after they've given that dose. The other requirement FDA is wisely, I believe, put on is that they are asking for safety data and reports on each of the patients 2 months after they've received their second dose of the vaccination. So that'll be essentially 3 months worth of safety data. That's pretty good data for a drug that's, or a vaccine really, that's only given twice. So there's going to be a lot of information. The third thing to keep in mind is I strongly suspect, although I haven't seen it in the distribution plans in black and white yet, that our brave volunteers in the military will be getting this pretty early on, as will many of our first responders. So as this starts rolling out at the beginning of next year to the general public, or at the end of this year to some of the high-risk individuals, as it starts rolling out to the general public, we'll be accumulating an awful lot of information, if for nothing else, just on the vaccinations of the military. Now, that's not a lot of folks that look like me, but it will be another large segment of safety and experience data. So your point about Gardasil is very well taken, but it's a very, very different scenario we're looking at right now.
So, Dr. Sal, what percentage of our population needs to be vaccinated in order for them to achieve, I don't know what they call it, herd immunity or whatever it would be called, but
Well, that's the term. It always seems to me as a curious term, but scientists sometimes come up with curious words. But yeah, well, I've seen 2 estimates that keep popping up, and the answer right now is nobody actually knows, and there's a reason for some of that. One is 40% and one is 70%. So the truth, my grandmother would always say, is probably right down the middle of that. So let's say it's about 50 some odd percent, 60%, something like that. But the other thing to keep in mind is we've already had, what, 10 million American citizens have the virus. Now, we don't know if they've all had the same level of virus, if they've all developed the same level of immunity to the virus, but we will have a baseline of individuals who have had and survived, if you will, these infections will have some level of immunity. So I don't know if it's going to be 40, 50, 60, 70. So let's say 60%. And I hope that we get to that level by the end of the summer, beginning of the fall of 2021. Otherwise, we're going to have other worries that we're seeing now too. And I think that would be very taxing on America's psyche. You know, suicides, alcoholism, drug abuse, violence in the home, they're all increasing. Depression, anxiety is increasing dramatically because no one can see the end in sight. So I like to say, let's look for that little pinprick of light now that we have a fair degree of certitude and a fairly safe and quite active vaccine on the horizon here.
Throughout the 50 American states and throughout the world's nations, we've seen various approaches to this disaster. Some have had strict lockdowns. Some have had relatively little lockdowns whatsoever.
Right.
It seems from the latest data that there doesn't seem to be a great deal of difference, whether we're talking about countries in Europe like France, which have had a solid lockdown, and places like Florida, which has been relatively lax. So are these draconian measures about complete lockdowns of society, are they ill-advised, or where do we go from here on this?
Well, I don't know that I would call them ill-advised because we just haven't had this kind of situation, Frank, in front of us before in modern times. The last time we were faced with a global pandemic like this was 1918, 1919. Nobody I know is around then. So I think, and this virus is very, very different than all of the others that many of the others that we've seen. So I refrain from critically criticizing decisions that were made, because I think people made the best decisions that they could make with imperfect information that they felt, and this is a key point, fit the characteristics of their countries and their societies. How you can do things in Norway and Finland, in Russia, in China, United States, and even to that point in New York City versus the panhandle of Florida or Utah or the Dakotas. It's all different. So I think people have made it, and I really do believe no one wants to hurt anyone. They're making the best decisions that they can make. Why is this variance in the way we see it? Well, as a kind of a joke that my lawyer friends like to say, if you get 3 lawyers in an office, you'll get 6 different opinions and none of them will be any close to together. Same in medicine. When I was teaching at Columbia University, I would tell my students, at Belmont University, I tell my students on a doctoral path, the only thing that a doctoral degree gives you is the ability to stand up in front of a bunch of your peers and be yelled at and screamed at that you know absolutely nothing, and you're totally wrong. But you have to be able to make a logical decision and defend your decision with logic, reason, and good intent. And I by and large, I think that's been done. By and large, there's some exceptions, but I think by and large, that's been done.
Daria, who's just going for her doctoral degree, had a chuckle when you made that analogy about what happens when you get a doctoral degree.
Everybody tells you you're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about.
I'm beginning to think I know less now than before.
I know less now than I did when I was 23.
Dr. Sell, one thing that I'm really curious about with your background is what you think about this question. Can this year serve to really reform the way the government approves drugs and reduce the cost? We know that we always hear about the big bad pharmas, but they actually have a very high level of cost. And we're seeing them move toward combinatorial science rather than totally new line of drug development. We need to have new lines developed. Can what's happened this year serve as any kind of blueprint going forward for reform in the drug approval process?
Absolutely. I think that the folks at FDA and the folks at pharma, I've been talking about this for a very long time, and I asked a good friend of mine who works in an institute that studies the food and drug law, Dr. Susan Winkler, and she and I both agree that the last time that the FDA's processes were given a top to bottom review was under the Dan Quayle FDA review panel. And there've been little incremental views of this and incremental views of that. But I think what we're seeing here, and if the American public is smart when we do the post calamity review of what we've learned and what we haven't learned, one of the learnings will be that you can make some changes to the way drug products are developed and reviewed. There's a real need to create better ways to treat pain, for example. And FDA has been a little bit resistant to looking at new ways and new therapeutic modalities for pain management. And unfortunately, what we're left with is these awful, awful opiates. Well, I shouldn't say that. With opiates who have a lot of side effects, they do their job, but they have a lot of side effects. And it's taking companies who are looking at novel ways to treat chronic pain a very long time to get FDA to focus attention on it. So I think that's one thing. The other you're not going to be seeing all that often is the way the industry has compressed and gone at financial risk here. It's unheard of, virtually unheard of in the pharmaceutical industry to start creating production lines and actually start, getting those things geared up to just press the button and get tens of millions of doses. Someone told me J&J is getting ready to produce 1 billion doses of their vaccine within a few months after approval. So they're taking huge financial risks to do this. I don't think you're going to be seeing that all the time. I think that's something that will always come after approval, but I do think the approval cycle can be compressed dramatically. A lot of the paperwork can be compressed dramatically.
I think besides compressing the time too, we have to recognize, I bet a lot of our audience doesn't realize it takes close to $2 billion, that's B with a billion, $2 billion to take a drug to market when it's a name brand drug. So there are big expenses involved. A lot of them are related to government approval. I was amazed at the licensing costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a company to just begin the process. It seems to me that, we do things for the social good in this country, that we could reduce some of those costs to encourage new drug development.
There is some of that for rare diseases, Daria. So you're right. There is some exceptions made and procedural things made and regulatory things done to help rare disease drugs get to the market a little earlier. NORAD is an association that looks at Association for Rare Diseases and advocates for those. But we can do them a little faster. The other thing folks keep in mind is that there's anywhere from a 30 to 50% fail-off rate in drugs as they move through the development cycle, from the first stages when they test them out in animals to when they finally do the studies in large populations of humans. And that, so it's not only the cost, but it's also the failure rate that you have to absorb. When I would see patients and they'd get these prescriptions for medicines and they wouldn't fill them, or they wouldn't take them, or they would take them when they felt like it, not when they really needed it, or not the right way, and weren't getting better. I would always remind, and they say, well, it's just a capsule. It's just I would say, oh, look at those rocket ships going up from Cape Kennedy down the road, because in Melbourne on the Space Coast. Those drugs, that little tablet or capsule, has the same amount of technology in back of it as that spaceship that's going up to the International Space Station. So there's a lot of technology that goes into developing it, and a lot of money, a lot of brain power too.
Even before COVID erupted onto the scene, the Trump administration, frankly, quite early in the Trump administration, talked about a number of reforms in the pharmaceutical industry. Right to try was one that they were pushing extensively. Fast tracking was another one. What impact do you think that mentality had on the success in getting this COVID drug to market?
Well, I think what it did, and Men's Health Network, which I speak on behalf of many times, including this, was a strong supporter of the right to try, act and orders. We have been pushing for that for many, many years. It's fallen on deaf ears until the Trump administration expressed a willingness to look at that and revisit it. They have a little bit different approach to the importance of decision-making that every American makes. And I think that's one of the big differences that we saw with the right to try legislation. I do think that they have a mindset that is to try and control regulation and to cut unnecessary regulation, which I'm not necessarily sure we will see if the Biden election is certified and then that administration takes into account, or starts doing its work. I think it's going to be two different mindsets.
As a pharmacist, are you confident that there will be an adequate and timely distribution of the COVID drug, or do you feel that there are a number of roadblocks to that distribution?
There are several. There are several roadblocks. My son is a physician in town, and he actually was tagged by the state as the physician to care for one of our locales' older COVID patient population. So he's pretty well linked into what people are asking to be done and need to be done for treating COVID. He hasn't heard much of anything about distribution. We are looking at maybe 2 to 3 months away. Now, I have seen paper distribution processes. I've been on conference calls with UPS, FedEx, and other distributors. I've had some, communications with the wholesalers, McKesson, and others that have talked about this. But I do think there are some things to be ironed out, and everything on paper doesn't always play out that way. One thing that scares me to death is that there may be, and I hear rumblings about it, an inclination to create our own new system. It's what you were alluding to earlier, Frank, where Governor Cuomo said, I don't trust them. We're going to look at this top to bottom and certify it our own way. I think that would be a big, big, big mistake.
Dr. Sal Giorgiani, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating discussion. We hope to speak with you again soon.
Anytime you'd like me back on, I'd be more than happy to come on and talk with you. And good
Thank
luck
you
with the
so
doctoral
much.
degree.
Thank you very much. Daria, I think that really was fascinating. And I think that not enough credit is being given, frankly, to that change in mindset that came about when the Trump administration took over the White House. It really was phenomenal, I believe. And certainly this drug getting to market, this vaccine getting to market is a major accomplishment. And I think that Dr. Sal made an allusion to the space program. It's kind of like a new way of putting a man on the moon. And it's an equal accomplishment. By the way, totally off topic. A lot of space enthusiasts, and I know Daria, you are one, and I am one, are deeply depressed. The Biden administration is signaling that it's going to put restraints on NASA. They're pushing NASA's money back to climate change research, which is already well financed all over the place. It's just another excuse to strip money out of the American manned space program and put it into something else entirely. Let's go to our next guest. Robert Curry is the author of Common Sense Nation: Unlocking the Forgotten Power of the American Idea and Reclaiming Common Sense. Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell us about the book.
Well, Common Sense Nation is the first of the two. And what it does is it tells what Americans all once upon a time knew about the founding. 150 years ago, there was no need for that book because everybody, college professors and people like you and me, knew it. But today, that has been really forgotten. We have a terrible situation where the scholars don't have don't have a clear understanding of the founders, and as a result of that, the understanding of the founders that's out in the public is badly degraded.
I had an opportunity to speak with a professor at a college here in New York City, and he mentioned that facts don't really seem to matter in college curriculum anymore. He felt that pushing a particular ideology, in this case, a hard left ideology, seems to take precedence over scholarship, over facts, over history itself.
Yeah, that's what the second book, Reclaiming Common Sense, is all about. I mean, in 2016, the word of the year in the Oxford dictionaries was post-truth. And what the kids are being taught in school now is that there really is no such thing as truth as we always have understood it. There's your truth and my truth and Oprah's truth, but there's no truth.
So we are facing as a nation, I think, a crisis in just about 2 generations of students. We've done more to rip the culture of America than an invading army could have done if they took over our educational system.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, what happened in the 60s was that the university was taken over by radicals, and then that generation of radicals handed the university on to an even more radical generation. So now, when I know kids are going off to school, I worry about them. I tell them I'm afraid for them. I tell them, look, they're going to try to kick the common sense out of you. Don't let them. They're going to try to teach you that America is a bad country. Don't let them. But that's what happens to kids.
So can we take back the media, the schools? Where do we find the people for the future who have common sense?
What a lovely question. Well, the good news is that we all in fact live by common sense. You and I, we all do, and that the attack on common sense and on the truth by the left in the media and in the university is it's a powerful attack. but it's attacking something that's also quite powerful. It's the very root of the possibility of being a human being. We have to know be able to know the truth to survive. And we have to live, and we in fact live by common sense in every waking moment. So people can be propagandized that there's no such thing as truth, and that common sense is just superstitious, silly ideas. But those things, the truth has a way of, you can't wash it away. So that means it's always possible, even in the Soviet Union, for people to find out what's really going on. They can do a lot to suppress the truth, but it's still there.
Well, I find it's interesting because if you look through history and we say, look at the European Union, we see this idea, the change came about, the European countries came together. And after a while, they recognized that they were losing their identity, and now they're pushing apart again. Which seems to me that wherever you look around the world, there are these swings back and forth. Do you think we've come to a period in our history where we can, if you want to say, reappreciate the American family, common sense, traditional values? I don't mean that we don't advance and we don't treat all people equal and move forward, but hasn't come time yet where we can bring back in some of the good things that we've lost, or are we going to suffer more?
It always has to be possible, doesn't it? I mean, it always has to be possible. Solzhenitsyn said the amazing thing about human beings is they have a capacity to wreck things when they're going great, and also a capacity to learn from having wrecked things when they're going great and turn around and rebuild things. So we have stood by and let the left wreck the country, but the movement, there's a lot of things going on in the direction that you're talking about. I mean, the movement away from the EU, the election of Donald Trump. I wrote my book Common Sense Nation before Trump declared for the presidency, and then I wrote the book, and then not very long right after that, along came a candidate who called himself a common sense conservative. I felt like I was maybe in the groove a little bit.
One of the things that has really concerned me about the changes recently are that in the past, we could flip back and forth between an election, have a balancing election, if you will. With the movement, the demographic changes in this country with what people now label blue states and red states, it seems to me that housing is pretty permanent, jobs are pretty permanent. How will the children of these parents learn to debate, learn about differences, respect differences, if everybody is segregated into identical communities according to political beliefs? Is this too much to get past?
Well, it's a huge problem. It certainly is a huge problem. It literally is the reason I wrote the books. I mean, I understand that that sounds presumptuous, but that's how I felt I could contribute to that. I wrote the books so that they could be understood by any citizen who wanted to understand. And I think that people do want to understand, even the ones who've been, well, some of the people are perhaps too far gone, but kids who innocently have come out of school and have had their minds filled with bad ideas, those people are still ready to understand for themselves what's true and what's right. And so you and I have to believe in that. What you're doing every day is trying to accomplish that. And that's what I tried to do with the books too.
Our discussion this afternoon has talked a lot about what happened in the Soviet Union. When we look at the restrictions, not only imposed by universities, which harass and discriminate against centrist and conservative students, when we look at what Facebook and Twitter did in this past election, when we look at the major media, which attempts to say that any view other than hard left is unacceptable, are we returning to the days of the Soviet Union to some extent, when we had to have a samizdat press, those old mimeograph machines that the rebels in the old USSR had? Are we really getting to that point?
I think in some ways we're worse right now than the Soviet Union, because the people in the Soviet Union really knew that Pravda there's no truth in it, and Izvestia, there was no news in it. There's a joke in there because Pravda means truth and Izvestia means news. So I mean, the Russians knew not to believe what they were reading in the press, and I think the maybe the biggest after what's going on in the university, certainly a contender for the other big problem is that too many Americans take the propaganda put out by the press seriously in a way that the Russians were clued in. What happens is if it keeps on going long enough where what's in the press is just lies, people will wake up to it like they did in the Soviet Union. That'll be a great moment for America, I think. And I think that's inevitable, really.
In intelligence operations, there's something called PSYOP, psychological operations.
Yes.
Do you see, to some extent, what happened in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the election day, where the networks were eager to proclaim Joe Biden the victor before all the results even came in, when the popular culture, started talking about the president-elect, even though he certainly is not yet, at least as of the we're taping the show, certainly not entitled to that title. Do you see that as a form of psychological operations in order to get the left's view across, or to get the left's candidate across?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question about it. The press that's doing that, which is virtually all the press, is operating as the propaganda wing of the left and the Democratic Party, and that's what they are. And too many people still think of the news as being the news, and they don't really understand that there's no truth and no news in the news. It's very hard actually to find out, something really specific. Like what are the water? How's the water table doing in your neighborhood? But there's no reporting going on anymore. There's just propagandizing.
So can you give us a game plan for taking back, I'll say, just two areas, education and the media? How do we get common sense back into those two areas, given where we are today?
Well, I'm sure you know that you're asking a question above my pay grade, which I know you know that. So let me see if I can not sound too foolish. I just think that there is a great mass of Americans who love America, who believe that America is a good country, who want to believe that America is a good country, who have in their bones an idea about what this whole wonderful, magnificent experiment that the founders set in motion means, that they have a feel for it. And like you talked about the EU and I mentioned about Trump, I think as it becomes so obviously bad as it is, people are going to naturally turn towards the truth. And it's really important that we continue to do what you're doing, and I continue what I'm doing. I once saw an interview with Milton Friedman, and that was back in a time maybe just difficult to remember, back during the Reagan years, when Friedman's ideas were considered to be triumphant in economics. It was later that the left became resurgent in economics. And the interviewer said, "How does it feel to have won the argument, in economics?" And Friedman said, "I didn't do that." He said, "All I did was keep on making the argument until the American people, events brought the American people into a position where they were ready to hear it." So you see, that's the important thing. We need to keep on sending out the message so that people, when they're ready, the people will have someone to turn to. You, the books I've written, the Claremont Institute, people who hold to the truths of the founding and love the founding.
Is there a unique factor in what we're facing now? Even in the Soviet Union, it wasn't so much influenced by outside sources, but here in the United States, we're seeing with Confucius Institutes in universities, with Hollywood being beholden to Chinese money, frankly, Chinese investors. At what point is this not just an internal battle for the soul of America, but a battle of America versus a foreign influence that is distinctly opposite of the American experience?
Gosh, what a smart question. Golly. You've been paying attention, haven't you? Yeah, the Chinese are using the money that corruptly we are sending them to turn around and corrupt us. This is kind of an amazing thing. I think the Russians didn't have to deal with anything quite like that, as far as I know. So the corrupt bargains of the Clintons and the Bidens with China, transferring American wealth by the trillions to the Chinese. The Chinese are very cleverly they're a serious adversary, by the way, and not stupid. And they're using that money to corrupt the political powers and the media and Hollywood and even sports. It's a huge thing, and something that if we waked up to it, we could quickly correct.
Now that's my kind of woke.
Ha, that's right. Ha, my kind too. Thank you.
You know, one thing that shocked me is that our universities have deteriorated so that we're not competitive. Our journalism schools are not teaching journalism, but really an opinion science that they're calling journalism today. It really concerns me. I know that when I was teaching at a university, I had extraordinary pressures put on me and was told, you're not getting promotions. We don't want you in meetings because you would vote differently. You won't get funding for any speakers that are not liberal. There's so many different types of pressures that are on anyone who is looking to move us toward a balanced center. I don't know how long this country can last with those type of pressures. What do you tell people when every time we turn around, the conservative side says, I will fight for your right to hold an opinion different than mine, and the left comes out and says, you're not deserving of an opinion, I'm going to cancel you. What do we tell fellow conservatives or even middle of the road Americans?
Well, that's you ask tough questions, by the way. Do you always ask such tough questions, or are you picking on me?
We always ask the tough questions.
She's the tiger in the show, huh? Okay, thanks for the warning. So, the American people, even polls, which are stupid, even polls recognize that the American people reject and dislike political correctness. So the whole political correctness project is being carried on in defiance of what the American people like, and that's going on. That's what's going on at the university and in Hollywood and in Washington D.C. too. But people don't like political correctness, and they can recognize it when they see it. Now it's being pushed at us really hard, no question about that. But the reality of that is, I don't know if you know, I don't know how to quite say this, but in your own life, you've seen when somebody's pushing too hard, what happens is people push back.
I just have to add one thing real quick, Frank. I just read a book this week, and it said that we are very much a moderate country if you exclude the 1% of the political elite and the media. So it seems to me that we're going to be okay.
Well, if you're right, then we do have the power in our hands, but we can't continue to let the people who want to tear America down run things, because it's really a dereliction of duty, isn't it? If we're really a moderate country and we're letting the immoderates run things in Washington and Hollywood and especially in the universities, then hey. Time to come around and start straightening that out. All of those horrible things that are going on at the universities are paid for by the taxpayers, by you and me. And so in principle, all that if we the moderate Americans and the American-loving Americans would assert ourselves against political correctness and anti-Americanism, this could happen pretty quickly if we just will. And that's why what you're doing is so important.
Robert Currie is the author of Common Sense Nation, Unlocking the Forgotten Power of the American Idea, and another book, Reclaiming Common Sense, Finding Truth in a Post-Truth World. Robert, thanks so much for being on the program. We look forward to our next discussion.
I enjoyed talking with you and with the tiger, too.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
And to our audience, thanks for tuning in. And this week, of course, was Veterans Day. To all of our veterans, thank you.
We welcome our newest radio affiliate, Net Talk America, in Washington, D.C. at 96.7 FM. We're broadcast throughout the United States on radio and television and worldwide on the web. Watch us on Roku, public broadcast stations, and on the AM/FM247.com network. You can access our program on our website at usagovpolicy.com. Join us again next week. We're sponsored by the New York Analysis of Policy and Government, a division of the American Analysis of News and Media, Inc. at usagovpolicy.com and the Institute for American Politics. Email us at truthinradio@gmail.com.
Our producer is the amazing Abigail White. Our director is the brilliant Jeff Hansen.